All right. Hello, everybody. We are going to wait a few minutes for the room to start filling up. Looks like we've got some participants filing in. Good morning or good evening, wherever you are. We'll get started in just a minute or so. Okay. Good afternoon. Let's see if you guys want to post something in the chat. Let us know where you're watching from.
Good afternoon. Yeah, that would be fun to know where people are. So, Miami, nice.
Miami, Toronto,
nice. Mexico. Oh wow.
Quebec,
yeah.
The UK, awesome.
Global
India,
audience.
Colombia, Brazil, New Zealand. Awesome. Barcelona.
Real Madrid.
Amazing.
Hi,
Love
Elizabeth.
It. You also get a personal shout out.
Yeah.
Bolivia, amazing. Oaxaca.
Nice. The Oaxaca food is amazing.
Wonderful. All right, so we'll give it about another minute. We'll start at 11:02 Pacific time, and we'll get going.
Sounds good. I'm excited.
This is going to be a great one. We are thrilled to share all these insights with everyone today. It's going to be very exciting. All right.
We're about to go into La Casa de la Moneda, right?
I love it. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. It is welcome to Parrot Analytics Live. Thank you everyone for joining. We're going to be discussing the incredible demand story of La Casa de Papel, also known as Money Heist in English. My name is Rebecca Zabarski, and I'm the Director of Marketing at Parrot Analytics, where we help the entertainment industry understand global audience demand in today's attention economy. And Parrot Analytics Live is our thought leadership series that features industry insiders and leaders together in this live format. So we have a few minutes at the end of the presentation that's reserved for a Q&A. We're going to address some of the questions that you've already asked in the registration process, as well as pick up some from this Zoom chat. So once Alejandro starts with the presentation, I will be manning the chat. I'll be writing down some of those questions. If we don't answer them today, we will follow up with you. So we'll get your questions answered. I want to give a special welcome to our Demand 360 Lite and Enterprise partners. We're very thrilled to have you with us today. And of course, a big thank you to everybody from all over the world. We know it might be late in, wherever you are. We appreciate you spending your time with us today. So now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Alejandro Rojas. He's our Director of Applied Analytics. And he's been analyzing Money Heist for many years, and he's got some great insights to share about the content with you. So Ale, you are on. Everyone, please enjoy.
All right. Thanks, Rebecca. For me, it's a pleasure to be here. As Rebecca said, my name is Alejandro Rojas. I'm the Director of Applied Analytics. And my role is about how to push the envelope in terms of how data can be useful and like how can we really extract insights from all the data sets that we have. So today is just an example of how we can do this. And to me, it's a pleasure to actually present this show because I'm also a fan. So I'm hoping that this is going to be entertaining and also it's going to be quite insightful. So let's just start right from the beginning, and then I want to say that había una vez, once upon a time, La Casa de Papel was a linear TV show that was aired in Antena 3. And if you look at some of the other similar shows that were broadcast during that time, about the same period and all of that, we see that in this case, just looking at the linear ratings, it looks like the red bars are like the Casa de Papel ratings, and it's a little bit higher than the rest, but I mean, more or less, all of them look the same, right? Like we cannot really tell from this data, what's happening, or we cannot really tell or anticipate, what was going to be like that Casa de Papel was going to be like a global hit, just by looking at this. And that's why I think, like the whole notion of demand really is such an interesting metric and concept, because as opposed to linear metrics are really were developed more like using panels, and were developed more in an era where like you wanted to understand what was like the viewership that you have during prime time. Our metric demand really tries to understand if the consumers are doing activities that somehow you can clearly see that they're expressing demand for the show. And this could be anything from a Google search, or could be things like you go into Wikipedia to read about it, or maybe you go into YouTube to watch a trailer, or maybe you actually download episodes and you're watching a specific episodes on like using like BitTorrent for that over piracy network. So all of that for us is a signal that there's demand for the show. And the line that you see in here, the red line that you see in here, is actually the demand for Casa de Papel during the time that it was aired on linear TV. And then again, like we also show as a reference the demand for some of the other shows. And what's interesting about this is like, even though the linear ratings bars that you see on the background more or less tell you that all of the shows are kind of about the same, or more or less, in terms of demand, we saw like a clear difference, right? And for us, that was a signal like, look, this is like a show that is a little bit different from what we've seen. If you look at the differences in demand, this is significant. And in a way, it kind of like made us anticipate that this show was going to be successful. If we fast forward, because like, again, like think of this as like, this was the period where all of these shows were aired on linear TV. So we actually measured the actual demand during that time. But then if you fast forward 1 year, let's see what happens in terms of demand. And here again, like you see that, that advantage that you had essentially gets compounded, right? So over time, like the difference is just incredible, right? Like really, like you see like Casa de Papel just blowing these other titles out of the water in this case. And not only that, I think the other interesting thing, and like you see these like rainbow colors, really what this represents is the fact that there's demand across all of these different regions. For reference, the red portion is the demand in Spain, and then we're adding like the cumulative demand across all of these different regions. So even from the beginning, right, if you go back, right, like this is like, we're measuring like the cumulative demand since the first day of the first season for each of these shows. What's different about Casa de Papel is like, since the beginning, there was actually a lot of demand from Latin America, which you don't see. I mean, like in some of these, like, like really Spain was like the most, like the biggest source of demand for like some of the other shows that we see as reference. And again, so that like lead us into like an early indication, like, look, this was going to be like a different show, like, and the fact that, again, like for the benefit of really understanding this, it's all about like capturing what people want. And that's really what demand does, because like it's really capturing everything, like a Google search, people talking about it, maybe a tweet, a Facebook like, or like a specific download of an episode. All of that is like really, it's a signal, because when you think about it in the attention economy that we live in, there's like a lot of like content out there, but really the challenge is like, how do you get the attention of the people, right? So, and by capturing, all of these activities, what we're doing is like quantifying these people's attention. So that's why I think demand is able to kind of predict, like, this was going to be a winner. If you fast forward to today, just like the weekend that it was like released a couple of weeks ago, what you see is like it's the most popular show in the world. So quite a significant achievement, I think, especially given like the fact that we collect data from like thousands of shows, right? So what you see in here is actually a demand distribution curve. And what we mean by that is, imagine like we organize all the shows from the most popular to the least popular. And what's going to happen is like there's going to be an average, and that average lays in here in this like 1x quadrant, okay? But then like what's interesting about entertainment in general is like, as opposed to like the typical, statistics curves that you see, is like, this is a curve that is what they call long tail over one of the tails. And really what that means is like, if you look at the really top popular show, which is like Money Heist in this case, it's actually 100 times as popular as like the average show, 115 times as popular as the average show. So this 115x really means like this show is like 150 times as popular as the average show. And of course, you can kind of see how like all the other shows that we track, thousands of shows, stack up. And what we have seen, again, empirically, is like, to be in this exceptional quadrant, only 0.2% of the title make it over there. So it's very hard. I mean, it's like there's a lot of competition, of course. And to be this successful, I mean, it's not an easy job for sure. Because like, again, like think of like, this is only 0.2% of the titles are going to make it over in that quadrant, so this is going to be useful, in the presentation, because I'm going to refer to this. So I just wanted to really kind of walk you through how this works, because at the end, this is a way to essentially, especially today, going back to the attention economy, this is a simple way to understanding where people are placing their attention, because like if you track all the titles that are out there and you're able to see, where it's like, how popular they are, then you can kind of get a sense of, how relevant they are for your business. So, but let's just now, I guess like, we know it's successful, we know it's the most popular title in the world, but let's just try to think about how did it get there? I mean, I think that's a question that probably we got a lot of questions like that, and I think everybody is on its mind. And I think what you see in that regard is like, this is a process, right? It's not like you get there overnight. I mean, like you start building your success. And the way they, Casa de Papel did it is like, across all the different seasons, all the different parts, you were actually gaining ground, right? And that ground, as I said, like there's like a whole compound effect, and that's how you get to be like the most popular show. Interesting enough, if you look at the different seasons, part 4 in particular, that was released in April 2020. I also think it was released during the time when like most of the world was in lockdown. So I think that also really helped. When you think about like the popularity that it reached over that period, it's even higher than the popularity that it has today. Even though, like, I mean, the overall trend, of course, is incredibly, going up, right? So in any case, like, I think also the timing is important, and trying to understand, like, how these curves work. It's one of the things that we spend a lot of time, because at the end of the day, I mean, and we got some questions regarding this. It's like, how do you know if it makes sense to do a new season, or should you like just sweat out? Like, how do you time this? Like, all of these questions are relevant. And one of the things that we have done over time is like we're able to actually identify how each of these shows, or what is the relevancy that each of these shows bring to their specific platform. So if you do that, imagine that in this case, Casa de Papel is part of Netflix, but we can analyze its success relative to all the other Netflix titles, so we can tell you what is the value add that show really gives to Netflix. And by doing that, the cool thing about that is like then you can really analyze the value, and then analyze how that value changes over time. Okay, so think of this as like a flow of value that every quarter you're delivering, because like the more popular it is, that really is related to how many subscribers you're going to get or you're going to retain. And by using our metric, we're able to identify, what is the value add that this brings to the platform. And what we see in here is very clear. Like when you have a new season, of course, like value goes up, like audiences go up, there's interest. during the off-season period, that's normal too for all the shows. You expect this to drop, and that's what you see. So like, like new seasons, it goes up. Like when there's off-season, then it goes down. That's just like, the way like TV really works. And what's interesting about this, again, like we call the green bars, we call those like the new season growth rates. And by tracking this, it's actually very important because like, in this case, what you see is like part 3, for example, was able to get like 167% like increase in value add. And for us as a signal, like, look, this is a show that every season is gonna drive a lot of demand. And not only that, if you go back to the beginning, even at the beginning, it was just driving like big percentages, right? Like, and I think this speaks to the fact that once you understand that this is a show that is able to deliver this type of growth, then you know that you have to do more seasons, right? So it's more like a calculation where based on the history of the show, then you're able to estimate, how well the new seasons are gonna do. And not only that, is the other thing that is important is like, what is the decay rate that you observe over time? Because like, not all the shows decay at the same rate. There are some shows that basically stick around longer, some of them decay faster. And this rate, a comparative basis is also an interesting metric because this also tells you like, like what is the sort of like ideal timing for the new season? Because if you have a show that really has like low decay, maybe imagine the case like the opposite case of this. So it's like you have like low decay and low growth rate. Then there's like little incentive to actually do a new season because like the show is not really decaying, but the new season is not going to deliver that much of a bump, as opposed to like the opposite case where like if you have a show that for every season you drive a lot of demand, then that makes it so that that's a show that is more likely to be able to kind of go into like more seasons. So these two metrics I think are important to kind of understand that. It also, I think it's interesting that it shows you how the marketing of the show was really well done. If you think about this, like for example, like again, like going back to part 3, you had like a huge bump, but then also there was a lot of anticipation, right? So like you had a 20% increase over the second quarter of 2019. So managing that, I think is also very important. Like being able to kind of like create a marketing campaign that keeps the show relevant, so that you're able to experience this growth is really one of the key, right? So then the things that I think, talking about marketing and talking about like things that you can do to kind of really drive that demand, I want to kind of highlight some of the things that they did which were not conventional, right? So, and I have here some examples. I mean, like some of it were related to gaming that they did with like Ubisoft, for example, but the show also did partnerships with like Diesel, for example. And all of these were timed in a way that also add to the demand of the show, right? So if you think about the partnership with Diesel Jeans, it was like right before, during the release of part 3. If you think about like some of the games that had like, that Ubisoft has created, some of it like in the newest one, Watch Dogs, was released previous to this new season. Like the one about like Rainbow Six Siege was actually delivered on November 2019. So again, like this gives you a sense of like, by doing this, this keeps the brand relevant. This gives like, like the show like becomes more like an immersive experience. And I think that's important to be able to get to where it is, apart from the story, of course. But like, I thought that this is like a useful like reference for some other people to kind of look at. So thinking about that again, like, trying to identify why is it that, what is the global potential of a local production? What are the ingredients that we should look into? And this is a question, we got a lot of questions regarding this, right? Like, how can we identify that this is going to be a show, a hit, and all of that? So when you think about that, the way we look at the show, about and analyzing the show is really comprehensive. So we try to analyze it from a 360-degree perspective. And for that, we have created a metric or like a set of metrics called the pulse, which essentially measures the pulse of the show. So let me walk you through that because I think you're going to find it very fascinating. I think if you think about that metric, it measures the show across multiple dimensions, right? Like, so we have demand, which is just pure demand, and you have travelability, which tells you how well the show travels. You have franchisability, which measures like if this show is likely to be franchisable. Then you have momentum that really measures if the show is gaining ground or gaining momentum, gaining audiences. Longevity, which tells you, basically like the sustaining power of the show to stay relevant. And the reach, which tells you like how much of a reach is able to get, right? Like, so these are all elements that we're able to analyze for thousands of shows. And by doing that, essentially, if you want to have like the perfect show, you want to be kind of like as big as possible, almost cover all this circle, right? Of course, like that's hard to do, but if you look at this shape, it's almost like a perfect show. You think about it, it's like, wow, it's like so good across like all the dimensions, right? So that's something to take into account because like everything that we do is kind of measured across like these quadrants that I was mentioning before. So whenever we see the exceptional quadrant, that means that only 0.2% of the titles make it there. And what you see in here is like most of the metrics are on those in that quadrant, right? Like the exceptional quadrant. Only franchisability and longevity only make it to outstanding, which is still great. I mean, if that's like, so again, like this is as a way to analyze the show. I think it's very comprehensive. And what I want to spend a little bit of time is like if you look at the different metrics, you see that the metric that they do the best, is travelability, right? Like we're talking that is 61 times as the average show in terms of this metric in particular. That's like where this show actually excels. So I think that's like something that is very important because today, if you want to be a global hit, you really have to travel, and that's this is just like an example of that. So let's just like analyze this in further detail. How does that work? When you think about it, I mean, in here, like let's look at Spain. It's like what's interesting about this chart. I thought is like even like as of today, Spain is not even like the top market for the show. It's actually India, which is like wow. Or the US is number 2, so incredible. It's like a Spanish show that is able to be even more successful than what it is in Spain in other markets. So that's one thing, first thing to kind of see. Then the next thing is like that I want to take you in a journey of how this happened, right? Because like again, like I show you at the beginning, like this takes time, right? And what we see is like if we go back to 2017, like this was the year that the show was released. Spain was by far like the market where it had the most demand. But what we could see is like we could see some demand, especially from Latin American countries, right? Like you start seeing like in these top 10 markets, like the Latin American countries were represented in there. So it makes sense. I mean, it was a Spanish show, like that's a natural market. What's interesting is like when we move to 2018, yes, Latin America stays relevant, but now it's actually way more popular, right? So if we go back in here, remember, like we were talking about 0.4, 0.9. In this year, like the show wasn't even available in Latin America, but we were still registering like enough demand so that it was almost like, for example, in Mexico, it was 0.9%, 0.9x, so 0.9 as popular as the average show, which is incredible, not even like having distribution, of course. After you move to 2018, you have distribution, like then it becomes, it increases in popularity, and then it reaches to countries like that are not really traditional, like Turkey. And I have a story about that because I actually mentioned I had the opportunity to meet the creator, Alex Pina, and I mentioned this to him because in early 2018, we met. And when I was looking at these numbers, I was telling him, and he didn't even know, I mean, he sold the show to Netflix, but he doesn't have like that capability to understand like how the show is doing, or the granularity at least, to know like how the show is doing across all the countries, as we do. And I was telling him like, look, like Turkey is a country where the show was popular, and he was he was quite surprised. He was like, really? Wow, yeah. So it was interesting. I'm gonna go back to into that story, but I want to also kind of finish in terms of showing you what happened after 2018 and 2019. I think what's critical in 2019 is like now you see other markets, a lot of like Europe, and then like even like Africa, getting into the top 10 in terms of like demand. And then 2020 becomes even more global. 2021 super global, right? Like this is a show that, as we saw, like India is the most popular, like it's like the country is the most popular at this moment. So super popular. So let me again, like this is like a key thing that it's interesting to look at. And what I want to kind of go back is to the story that I was telling you about Alex. This is him when he won like the international Emmy in New York back in 2018. And that's when like he told me, like, because before I met him like in early 2018, and I told him, look, your show is popular in Turkey. And when I met him later that year, what he told me was like that essentially like weeks after I told him that, Netflix decided to dub the show in Turkish. So like his question was like, how did I know that it was popular in Turkey? So I thought it was interesting. And actually this is what you see, right? Like you see how popular this show has been in Turkey. And the fact that, that popularity also drives the fact that you want to dub it, so very just an interesting anecdote that I wanted to kind of share with you guys. He's such a nice guy too. So in case like you don't know him, and like yeah, he's super nice guy. So apart from Turkey, I also want to talk about like, so yeah, like in that, you remember that year was kind of like, even for him was kind of like weird, like, wow, this show is popular in Turkey. It's just like, again, like we're breaking, or like the show was breaking some like natural frontiers, let's say. And even today, what we see is like, even like the announcement last year that the show is going to be franchised, and it's going to be there's going to be like a version of the show like in Korea. So this is like the gang, for the Korean market, and it's going to be replicated. Interesting enough, we look at the demand again. I think this helps you to understand why they're making this decision. And I think it's like, yeah, the show obviously super popular in Spain. It has been popular in Korea, but maybe not at the same level. And I think what they found was like there was a lot of untapped potential. So if they had like a local version, they can essentially untap that market and really be able to gain those audiences. And then that goes back to the question of like, oh wow, so this show has something that makes it so that, I mean, that formula works, like the way the show was created, it actually works. And when we're talking about that, it's actually a good segue into what we call the content genome. So what is the content genome? I mean, like for every show, we're able to understand like what are like the DNA of that show. Think of that as a, we humans have a DNA, and that basically determines who we are and how we look. I think if we take that analogy to TV, basically the DNA of the show is all these elements that we can like code, and we can say that basically belong to that show. And of course, since we're talking that we do this for thousands of shows, and we're tracking all of this information, now we have a way to actually put together this genome, this content genome for like every single show that we track. And what's cool about that is like, then we can also aggregate and then start looking at things not only from the show perspective, but also from like the gene, let's say, perspective. So imagine like, for example, in this case, I want to explore the fact that Money Heist obviously is a crime drama. So I want to see like, what is it about crime dramas? Like, what can we say about crime dramas? If we do that, like what we're gonna see is quite interesting. Is like actually crime drama as a gene, let's say, or as a category, is like the biggest market opportunity in the sense that that's where like shows that belong to that category, if we aggregate every single show that belongs to that category and we aggregate their demand, like that's like the biggest market, compared to like sci-fi, superheroes, comedy drama. This is all done globally. And we did this for the second quarter of 2021. So not surprisingly, yes, the show like huge success, but also it's playing in the biggest market. So yeah, I mean, it's like that helps, right? Like if you are like a big fish in this market where like that's like it has like the most liquidity, like obviously that's like you can use that to your advantage, and that's what's happening here, right? Like being a crime drama, you're really targeting like the biggest category that you have globally. So that's interesting. Okay, so now we start understanding, okay, why is this working and why was this such a big hit? The other thing that I want to call your attention, and I think this is like quite interesting, right? Like how the show is put together. I mean, it's really, you have like the female narrator, it's female led. And what's interesting about that is like, this gives you a sense of like, okay, is this an element that's worth exploring, because, there's been like a lot of like interest in terms of how like females tell the story and how female-led storytelling works. So we decided to actually explore that. And one of the things that we can do using the genome is also analyze what is the success rate for the shows that basically belong to that or have that common gene, let's say. That's what we're showing in here. So let me show you, and then let me explain to you what we're showing in here. So let's just first look at all titles, right? Remember, like at the beginning of the presentation, I was showing you this like demand distribution chart, and like we had different quadrants, and really what that means was like, the exceptional quadrant, only 0.2% of the titles make it there, and you have to be 32 times as popular as the average show. And then you have outstanding, only 3% make it up there, good, average, below average. So these are the different quadrants. These numbers that you see here is like the actual distribution that we get. So this is the actual percentage of titles that fall into each of these categories. So that's one side. And then if you compare that to those that had like previous releases that were like female-led, you see like a complete different story, right? So like that gene in particular was just like super helpful, right? Like it looks like. So we take a look at the, those shows that had like recent releases, that gene, like we see that the odds of like making it to the top 10 is substantially, right? So from a 0.2% chance of making it to exceptional, you actually now, that becomes like a 12% chance. And from a 3% chance of making it to outstanding, that becomes 46 and so on. So like, again, like you see this as like, wow, so that's a gene that is like super, super good to have. And of course, like that's an element of like the success. And when you see that playing out today, we can even like track what has happened in this last season. And we can see, for the main character, Tokyo, we can actually track the demand for the actress, right? So Ursula Corberó, we can see the same way we track the demand for titles, we can track the demand for like Ursula as an entity, right? And what we see is like when you have like the recent release, of course, like a huge peak, right? So for us, this is an indication that people were connecting to Ursula, of course, because of the character, and then like again, like there's a lot of overlap between like the countries where she's popular and where the show is popular. It all makes sense. So it's an indication that like that character is connecting with the audience. But how about El Profesor, right? Let's look at that. Yeah, so same. I mean, like it's not like like there's also like a pick for Alvaro Morte who plays El Profesor. So this all makes sense. like audiences are expressing that they're connecting with these characters, and they're kind of like connecting with the actors and actresses that portray the character. And what's interesting about this, I tried to do a comparison. And again, like both of them are super popular everywhere, but like what's interesting is at the end of the day, like Ursula is ahead, which again, like I think reinforces the fact that that female lead was a really good decision, And again, like, is that like the only decision that kind of like made the show so popular? Obviously not, because you have to make thousands of decisions. But in a way, I think this is like, reinforces that fact that that's like a useful, or it was a really good decision to do it that way, right? And that's what we see in the data, right? So that's it. And just to end, because I also want to give time for people to have questions. We got a lot of questions regarding like if the success can be replicated or not. Like there are many ways to kind of approach this. Obviously, is it like because it was on Netflix? Can it happen in a smaller or like other platforms? I mean, all of this can be explored really, and it all depends on the questions that you have. One of the things that we wanted to do was like, knowing that crime dramas are like the biggest markets, we wanted to identify within this, this category. What you see is like there's a lot of competition in there. So like, yeah, like Netflix may have Casa de Papel, but then like, you have HBO Max, you have Prime Video, you have, HBO, and in any case, so all these streamers are kind of fighting in this market. It's the biggest market, right? And trying to identify what are those shows that could be like the next Casa de Papel is obviously hard. What we can tell you is like shows that may travel well, and like what got our attention is Mir Support, which has been around for a couple of years, I think, or more, but it's still relevant even today. So I thought that was kind of interesting to highlight. But then, of course, like that's just one approach, just looking at specific crime dramas. We can also just look at what has happened in the last couple of weeks and what we have seen. This is incredible. I mean, like this is a demand for Squid Game, and I don't know if you guys have heard about it. This is like a South Korean show, and it just took off. Like if you see like what has happened over the last 2 weeks globally, it's just incredible. And again, like I think demand just gives you a sense of like when this sort of course is happening, so you're able to react. And interesting enough, when you look at the content genome of this show, it's very related to the Hunger Games, which was like such a successful franchise. So again, like lots of similarities and like learnings that we can get from this. And the last thing I want to end is also kind of for those like producing in Spanish. I wanted to also show you like how La Casa stacks up against some of the other Spanish productions that have been out recently. And this is showing like the demand globally. And what we see here is like now it's like more and more, I think Spanish shows are becoming more global. And this is a trend that I think is on the rise. So in my mind, like Casa de Papel is just like the beginning, and it's like the tip of the iceberg, but there's gonna be more productions. And I'm like looking forward to seeing what happens in there. So just to end, I think we'll have like, some minutes for questions, but I wanted to kind of like do a recap. So like, so you guys know like what we talked about today. Like we show how like demand is a leading indicator for global success. I think that was like pretty interesting example. Actually, if you want to know more about that, there's a specific academic paper that was written among many other authors by Elena Neira, which is a really well-known Spanish, academic. So I recommend if you guys want to read it, I can send it to you. So that's one piece. The other piece was talking about travelability. I think travelability is definitely an element that is so important to be a global hit, obviously, because you have to be able to kind of really resonate across the world, and that's what has happened. And then talking about the content genome, how like looking at the genome can help you really try to predict, the success of a show. That's also very relevant. I think the great innovation that we bring to the table now is the fact that you can almost like iterate on this right? Because like you have the data, so you can kind of create different scenarios and kind of think about like, okay, what happens if I do it female-led or not? Or what happens if I decided to make like the story more of an underdog story or not? So there's so many elements that you can kind of test. And I think, in a way, like using big data and all of the data sets that we bring can help you kind of make those decisions. And for sure, like really tracking the demand metrics across multiple shows at any time can give you insights into what's relevant today and what could be relevant tomorrow. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca. For that, I also want to thank you for your attention. I know it's a lot of information, but I also want to give, I think we have time for a few questions, right? It's all right?
Yep. Awesome. Thank you so much, Ale. Right. So everybody is so curious about the white paper that you mentioned. So just we will send a link to that white paper that Elena wrote when we do a follow-up. So a lot of people were asking, we will send a recording of this and we'll send a few links. So we'll be sure to include that one. And then, of course, like you see here, you can reach out to Ale if you have questions about this. And then one other thing before we start with some questions, because there were a lot that came through the chat and we had a few from the registration. Ale had shared a few insights in this presentation from our product Demand 360. And I wanted to let you guys all know that we are offering a 30% discount to Demand 360 Lite. So we have a lot of people that are interested in, there we go, that's right. So this is the platform where you can access global and market specific data for shows like Money Heist, Squid Game, but 17,000 other TV shows. So I will leave a discount. We offer that exclusively to our webinar attendees. I'll share that in the chat in just a second. But let me go to some of the questions that were asked today. So there was one that I thought was really interesting for this presentation. This was asked by Steve. Is there a significant decay between seasons? This is when you were showing us the season over season demand. Does that suggest that releasing episodes weekly as opposed to all at once? Is that a good strategy? So this is a very good question about binge versus weekly release. I thought you could share some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting because like obviously all of these metrics play into that, right? Like if you have a show that has like a fast decay, then maybe you want to like kind of like time it or like try to kind of break it into pieces or maybe make it episodic. So all of that can be modeled, and depending on the type of show, like the answer may be one or the other. So it's not like, I wouldn't say there's like a specific recipe that you have to follow. I think the metrics can tell you a lot about like how audiences consume this and what they would expect. And by tracking that, also like the two metrics that I mentioned, like what is the growth rate of a new season and what is the decay when you're off season, those are two metrics that would be quite relevant to actually making those decisions.
And then the other question I thought was interesting, we've got 2 minutes to answer. This is, I think we'll go back to our content genome. The question is, how can these indicators be used at the development stage of a show rather than after it is produced and delivered?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of it is like understanding what the show is all about. So for example, the example that I gave about like a female-led, for example, what you can do is like you can essentially, like the way it works, imagine like we have thousands of shows, right? We would organize the shows into two groups, ones that were like female-led and ones that were not. And then we can track the success rate of each of these two groups. And then we can identify what is like the additional bump or like the success factor that it would be added by adding this gene. And of course, like you have to do this for like, all the things that you have. This is an iterative process, and it will guide you in terms of making all of these decisions so that you're able to make it to the top.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ale. That wraps it up for this Parrot Analytics Live. Thank you again, Ale, and thank you everyone so much for attending. We really appreciate your time. We've got a lot of questions. I tried to answer most of them in the chat, but if there are some outstanding ones, we've taken those down and we will address them later. we'll also send out a link to the recording and a few other links like to the white paper. So please keep your eyes peeled for more Parrot Analytics Live sessions like this. Like I said in the beginning, we're bringing lots of industry leaders, analysts together in this live format, and we'll do these every month. So we really appreciate your time. Thank you, Ale. Thanks, everyone. Hope you have a wonderful day or evening, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.